So let's talk a little bit about some of the uh, IPs, because I think some of the game IPs in particular that you worked with most closely are actually really unique to Asia. I'm thinking of like Kingdom Hearts and Tsum. I guess even more particularly to Japan itself.
Mhm.
And probably when you first started interacting with those IPs or potential IPs, uh, you know, if you had pitched those to me 10 years ago,
Yeah.
uh, I would have thought this doesn't make any sense. Like why is Goofy in an RPG game battling monsters?
Right.
Um,
Right.
and why is Disney making digital Beanie Babies? Um, but those have been incredible successes, both financially, but also in terms of kind of creatively.
Hmm.
Kingdom Hearts is a beloved IP.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you can share any of the stories behind how those came about, but also you know how do you find opportunities like that when there's probably a sea of options?
Right.
Um, yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the many pleasures I had of being in my position in Disney was that we were given a great deal of empowerment from the headquarters to understanding that Asia gaming in Asia is at another level in terms of the scale and also the creative talent across the different territories. So Disney was smart enough to know that there's great developers in Japan, in China, in Korea that could help interpret our IP, which is already very strong in all those countries, of course, thanks to the
Right.
films and theme parks and consumer products and television, and now Disney Plus, and but how local talent, local creative talent, local technical talent could help interpret our IP and put it into that form of entertainment, gaming. And I really respect that our leadership in LA knew enough to know that that was something that would elevate the brand in certain cases. And we always needed to have a rigorous creative process to get to a decision whether to do a game or not, just like we have the same process in the West. But being open to the idea that the characters could expand in what they do and who they are in these worlds, that it's not just derivative content, but in some sense it evolves the stories. And sometimes we create new characters, like in the case of Kingdom Hearts. First and foremost, something like Kingdom Hearts, it's important to say up front that Kingdom Hearts is not Kingdom Hearts without Square Enix. I mean, Square Enix
Mm,
is a fabulous creative organization and a technical or innovative organization. And the partnership, to sort of harken back to our conversation a little bit earlier, it's like that was built, and the relationship with Square Enix and Disney has evolved over 20 years now. And it literally started 3, 4 years before I even joined Disney. So I can't take credit for starting Kingdom Hearts. I did not.
mm,
Um, the two people who started Kingdom Hearts, one in Square Enix, one in Disney, it just so happened that they shared an elevator ride, and they were in the same office building, Disney and Square. This was before Square Enix, when it was still
no
Square.
way.
Were in the same elevator, and they just struck up a conversation, and it led to some brainstorming, some more detailed conversations, going to LA and Burbank to make the pitch. It was not always well received internally in Disney. It took a while to get people to understand why the game division felt working with Square at the time and Square Enix thereafter on, the makers of Final Fantasy, why Disney partnering with them and mashing up characters and creating new characters in this world, how we could make it from a brand perspective make sense and make a compelling game. But
Right.
the is in the creative output, and the creative output over multiple games and platforms over the years. A lot of talented people have contributed to it, and I had the honor of on the Disney side of managing the franchise for a decade. So, and I came in, there was a big lull in the franchise. It was 5 years since Kingdom Hearts 2 had come out, and there was really not, there's a couple of smaller like handheld titles, but there was no roadmap for the future. And I thought that odd. And as I got my head around the business and got to know the CEO at Square Enix at the time, Wada-san, and then the current CEO, Matsuda-san, after that, we were able to negotiate multiple new deals. Kingdom Hearts, taking the back catalog and up-resing them for PlayStation 4 and Xbox, launching a mobile title, and all tying into and leading to Kingdom Hearts 3, which was shipped in 2019. So it was a highlight of my career to be involved in that franchise and to get to be in the room with a lot of the creative sessions between Square Enix and their director, Nomura Tetsuya, in LA and up at Pixar with the brand owners of Frozen and Big Hero
Wow.
6 and Toy Story and Monsters, Inc. and sitting in the room in those offices in California while they were working on script and scenarios and just getting people coffee and staying out of the way of the creative. I try not to hurt myself. That's a career highlight for me. And then Tsum, and a lot of folks don't know Tsum outside of Japan, but it's actually the biggest, most successful game on any platform in the history of the Walt Disney Company in terms of financial performance. And it's a massive, massive hit. It's been in the market now 9 years, still consistently top 10 grossing in Japan. The most downloaded game app in the history of the App Store in Japan to this day. The largest DAU of any game in Japan, even today, after 9 years.
Wild.
Massive hit. And that came out of a conversation. That one, I was there on day one because it was a phone call between me and the head of the Disney Store Japan. And we came up, he was working on this plush and he showed me, and I thought it would make a good game. And then I have some really talented team members in Disney Japan who really worked with our partners at Line to come up with the conceit and to prototype, and selling that into Burbank was actually less challenging than Kingdom Hearts because we were all already committed to the consumer product line, the plushes. Mm-hmm. And so coming up with a game seemed additive strategically, but ultimately the game proved to be the real driver of the franchise. And so much so that eventually we rolled out consumer products, I think across like 20 or 30 different licensees in Japan. And they started selling the merchandise globally in all the parks, including in Shanghai and Hong Kong and Florida and LA and Paris.
Wow.
And they even created animation shorts for the Disney Channel based on it. And that all came out of like a phone call in Meguro, Tokyo, in 2013, I think. And you're talking about a multi-billion-dollar franchise created out of Japan. So a company like Disney being able to do that, it was a great honor to be allowed to be part of that. Even now, in my neighborhood, people sort of tease me about that game because everybody plays that game and know I was associated with it for a long time. So they like to come and my kids' friends all call me Tsum Papa.
That's a great nickname.
Maybe Justin's too hard a name for them to remember, but Tsum they can remember.
Right. Okay. Maybe we'll change the title of this video to interview with Tsum Papa.
Yeah. I mean, it shows the power of a good idea because so many people contributed to it. The partners are employees not just in the core team in Tokyo, but then folks in the US, folks around the region. And then, I left Disney about 4 years ago, and, Kingdom Hearts 4 they're working on right now. And Tsum is still a top, when you create great IP, it's more important than any individual. And it just continues to be popular, even when you change creative leads sometimes if it's done in the right way. And so Successful franchises, IPs are just invaluable. And in gaming industry, it's the same thing.
Yeah. Well, then going back to, I guess, the last part of the question, you probably saw lots of ideas like those come through as potentials. How did you decide? How do you decide which ones to invest in versus not? And I guess any cases where it didn't, where it wasn't the big success, and how do you learn from those?
Yeah, so there were cases where we failed, and we don't talk about those. One of the things that I think is a prerequisite to having a successful new IP or a new game or something is like, in the case of Tsum, we knew we wanted to create a game with Line because we had already, the messaging app Line, which is the default. It's the WeChat of Japan, right? And I had spent time with their CEO, understood their business strategy, again, to call back to earlier conversation.
Right.
We'd already been in business together because Disney helped Line launch their stamp business, which is a very lucrative business here, selling all types of emoji and stamps online in Japan. I know another Asian property and like WeChat and Kakao doesn't monetize well, but in Japan, even today, it monetizes very well.
Wow.
So we already had a business relationship with Line and Disney, but we knew that we wanted to do something bigger in the game space. And we just had that moment where I saw these plushes that the Disney Store Japan had originally developed, and it was based on these sort of a Buddhist principle, something you see at Buddhist temples of stacking stones. But instead of you had the idea of cute Disney plushes, and I said, well, that's a good idea for a casual game, and we wanted to create a casual game because we thought the Line audience would be very mass audience, not just gamers. So it had to be a very simple gameplay. And we knew we had great style guides from the Disney Store, and we could build upon that in 2D art for gaming. And we just took it from there. With Kingdom Hearts, I mean, it was pretty obvious. The makers of Final Fantasy were also Disney lovers and aficionados, and they had a very compelling story that they pitched to Disney and of how we can make it all work. So it's very case by case. I'll give you one more example. In Japan for years, the idle game genre is very popular, very steady. Idle games for predominantly male audiences, idle games for predominantly female audiences. And there was a time I challenged my team in Tokyo. We had already had Kingdom Hearts and Tsum, and I said, okay, I want to go into the idle genre. I think Disney can absolutely create original IP in the idle genre. Go out, talk to some partners, come up with your own ideas, and let's do a pitch process. And we did it. And eventually the idea that we arrived at became a game called Disney Twisted Wonderland. And Disney Twisted Wonderland is an idle game in Japan, a Disney branded all original characters, but based on and with very strong callbacks to a lot of the traditional Disney stories. And takes place in a university in this sort of alternative universe. And that game is between, top 10, top 20 grossing game in Japan for 3 years now. And the story was written by a Japanese manga artist who had already had some hits, ironically doing some work with Square Enix, not related to Kingdom Hearts. And she was also conveniently a huge Disney fan and aficionado. And so they worked on this whole conceit of what became called Night Raven College, which is where the story takes place. And this game to this day is a top popular game in Japan. The publisher is Aniplex, who is great. The same guys who do Fate Grand Order. So we knew we were working with a company that knew what they were doing. And that was an example of the team internally in Disney Japan figuring out how to work with a potentially great partner and a great writer, a creative mind externally, bringing them in, mashing it up with some of the internal ideas and evolving it into a $15-20 million a month game. and that persistently does well.
So
But then inevitably we make mistakes by trying to repeat what we did before, and copycat, you get diminishing returns, right?
right.
So you always kind of feel, oh, this one feels special, this one feels a little different when you're doing something that you're uncomfortable, like that's new.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and with Twisted Wonderland, which launched after I left Disney, it was in development while I was in Disney. We did the deal while I was there, but I left in sort of mid-development. And when it launched, by the time it launched, I was excited just to see where it landed creatively. And then obviously I knew it was going to be popular because of the passion behind it and the talent behind it. And to the credit of the team and the partner, I mean, it exceeded my expectations.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So it sounds like with each of these three examples in particular, at least, it wasn't like there was just a kind of a pitch out of nowhere with a great idea. There were kind of things that stacked up on top of each other, like there was this relationship with Line, that you wanted to build a casual game. There were already the Tsum plushies in the stores. You saw kind of the kind of a cultural connection with the stacking things at temples, and that is what brought it together. It wasn't just an idea, like a perfect idea out of the ether. It's like you're connecting things that already kind of sprouting.
Yeah. And in case of gaming, knowing that they're in genres that consumers like and are comfortable with, like RPG, Twisted Wonderland, the idle genre, Tsum again, a variant of a match 3 type of puzzle game, things, big genres with big audiences. Another example was in Korea with Netmarble, we did Marvel Future Fight. It was the same kind of, sort of that sort of genre, action RPG, that it was, they were very good already. Netmarble, they had proven expertise in the genre, huge passion for the Marvel brand. And the studio that developed the game, the Netmarble studio called Monster Studio, their GM, Ken Kim, is just a creative. He's a rock star. And so that Ken was pitching us the ideas. It was just, I want to make some of this guy. And he became so trusted, not only by my team, but Marvel in the US, that they allowed Ken and his team to create several original characters in Marvel Future Fight that then original Marvel characters that, made in Korea, that eventually became even incorporated into some of the US comics. So that they're actually part of the global Marvel character database now, and are used from time to time in some of the non-gaming areas of the business. That's when you have great creative people on the other side of the table, you're in pretty good shape. It's not always doesn't always work out that way, and sometimes you want something a little too much and you force it.
Right.
But when things go well, there's usually a really great creative person behind it.
Yeah. And that example actually makes me think of something else. There's this term, reverse innovation, which is, I think, pretty Eurocentric and kind of racist too. But it encapsulates this idea that there could be a trend of, now there's things happening in emerging markets that can be applied to other developed markets. And typically the term is used when talking about Alibaba supply chains, like what can the US learn about them. But the games, I think a lot of the games are so unique that you've had that you've been able to work with, like Tsum and Twisted University. It's like there's probably a rich vein of potential to figuring out, well, how could these types of dynamics, either characters or art styles or stories, gameplay mechanics, that can be applied in other parts of the world.
Well,
And yeah.
I've had that question posed to me a lot. Like in Disney, they would say like, "Why do you think this game doesn't work as well in the West, or why does this Western game not work as well in Asia, or something like that?" And sometimes it just is what it is. Like it's not through a lack of effort or innovation necessarily, but consumer preferences do vary. You know, and that's why you have to be somewhat cognizant of that when you're making games. And this is a business, so when you're thinking about where to place your bets and where to make your investments, you have to obviously have a degree of confidence that you're going to reach a big enough audience with what you're creating, and that's going to be relevant to a big enough audience that you'll get that return on investment.
Right.
But what I would reiterate is that at the end of the day, the Asian markets are the largest ones in gaming today, and putting more and more distance between themselves and other regions. So, if you're in a Western company, the problem is you somewhat, I think you have a little bit of a unconscious bias that you assume if you're in the US, you're in the biggest market. And in the case of films, that's true. Case of television, that's true. In the case of theme parks, that's true. But in the case of games, that's just not factually correct. So, the thing that was impressive about Disney, and one of, many of the bosses I had that were really impressive, one of them was a guy named Jimmy Pitaro. And Jimmy now he's the chairman of ESPN, but at the time he was the head of consumer products and interactive media. And Jimmy understood that like Tsum, is the biggest game in the Walt Disney Company's history. 95% of the revenue lifetime that will make is made in Japan. 95%, and is the biggest game in the company's history, because the industry is that big. But there's that many games that, it's not like compared to films, there's infinitely more games out there that are live services in operations today that are generating meaningful revenue for years. And so your competition is such that you can't necessarily insist that we're going to make one game that's going to be a big hit everywhere in the world, and we'll get economies of scale. And it sounds really good for MBAs and all that, but that's not what the consumers want. Right. And so there are games that have scaled across region. There are examples of that. And so the problem is that the exceptions become what people point to, when the overwhelming majority of games today, up until this point, and I believe into the future, will monetize in certain regions better than others. And that there's nothing wrong with it. If you look at what Garena have done with Free Fire, it's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant how they decided we're going to focus on emerging markets and super serve the end customers, because we understand the circumstances that they have when they're experiencing our game. Network limitations, handset limitations, payment needs, how they access content, how they are willing to pay for things, micropayments, stuff of that nature. They just do it. And being on the calendars, the social calendars,
right,
of those regions, launching events consistent with those parts of the world and prioritizing that. They just went in and found a huge and growing a part of the gaming industry that's largely uncontested right now. And they just went in the first person shooter genre, went in and just took it over and own it and do it better than anybody. And I really respect that focus. And, there's other companies that have scaled really well globally with a few titles, but I think most companies tend to be strong in one region or another.
Right. Yeah.
But the pie is so big, I don't necessarily think there's unless we're strong in all markets, there's an issue. I really, the more I'm at this business, the more I question that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, as Tsum proves, like Japan alone can be enough.
look at, as proud as I'm at Tsum, look at Honor of Kings.
Right? Or China alone.
Yeah. Right. That thing, like Honor of Kings is not a big game in the Western world. Like, right.
No.
Right.
Yeah. but it
I'll
doesn't
cite
need to
another.
be.
It doesn't
Yeah.
need to be. Look at how big the Lineage franchise is in Asia, right?
Hmm.
Massive, right? It's not that way in the West, but you know, over multiple titles now, over multiple decades, Lineage is just a massive franchise. And so I think you have to look at it in that context. There's in Japan, we have a lot of the top grossing games in mobile are games that don't export at all, like
Yeah.
Monster Strike or Fate Grand Order or Puzzles and Dragons. And just, you know, Puzzles and Dragons is 10 years old and still monetizes incredibly well.
Yeah.
Like I see their TV commercials all the time. Yeah, the top
Hmm.
10 grossing game. It is over 10 years old. Yeah. So but that game is not making money anywhere else. And still, it's a very healthy business for Gung Ho, who is the company that runs that game. So, I think you have to, if you're a game publisher or a game developer, being particularly strong in one region or another is not necessarily a bad thing.
Right. Yeah. Those are some incredible examples. Just as we start to wrap up, is there anything that we didn't cover for the audience that you think we should?
Gee. Well, no, it's been a lot of fun, and what I would say is, for those people who are watching that are in the gaming industry, be very proud, be very excited. Change is a given, and there's a lot of change right now. Be it sort of the increased sort of acceleration towards multi-platform, and the somewhat inevitability of Web3, and as business models continue to become diversified, there's always questions, always things to give you stress, things to figure out. But me personally, I find it very exciting. And the one thing that never changes is that we're in the entertainment business. To me, games are entertainment. When you talk about the game industry, you can talk about everything from the venture capitalists to the streamers, to the influencers, to the live ops, publishers, Apple, Google, all of these important components of the ecosystem. But at the end of the day, none of it matters if it's not serving the customer. The customer is why everything else exists. So whether it's blockchain, or if it's multi-platform, or if it's traditional free-to-play, or if it's console, whatever the genre or the platform, the IP, all of those things are really important, and figuring all that out is the difference between being successful and not. But all the things you're doing you're doing it for the customer. So
Right.
The one old man sage, pseudo sage word of advice I'd say is never lose sight of the customer, because technology is going to change. It's going to be Web 4.0 at some point. They're going to figure this out.
Right.
AI is going to dramatically impact what we do. And you guys had a great podcast recently on that. And generative AI is another area that anybody in gaming needs to be paying attention to. But ultimately, all of this, the cool tools and the technologies, again, are all about improving ultimately the quality of the output to the consumer.
Right.
And if you keep that as your North Star, you'll probably have enough successes that you can stay in the industry and hopefully make some money.
Yeah. Well, that is an inspiring note to end on. Michael, did you have something to add?
No, I think that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Justin, so how should folks follow you, learn more about what you're up to?
Well, I have, I'm a little old school. I'm not a big Twitter guy, but I tend to weigh in on what I'm thinking on LinkedIn more and more these days, because obviously a lot of, it's a bit more of a focused adult conversation around gaming and other technology topics. So I tend to do most of my communication on LinkedIn. Anybody who sees this and wants to reach out to me on LinkedIn, happy to have a chat. increasingly I'm sort of putting my thoughts on LinkedIn as well about where the industry is headed. But I'm as interested to meet other folks too. So anybody who wants to reach out, please do so. Like I said, we're always trying to learn new things here. So or at least I am. Yeah, I would say LinkedIn for sure. And I like personal conversations. So just reach out to me and we can link up there.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I'd love to see to hear more of your thoughts on Asia and gaming and entertainment on LinkedIn. So if you're thinking of posting more there, double thumbs up to do it.
Thanks. I think I'd love to do that because you get great feedback from folks as well. But I really enjoyed this. I appreciate your time, and yeah, I'll be a viewer of your future podcast for sure.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, well, don't forget to click like and subscribe when you watch the video, Justin.
Absolutely.
So our guest today has been Justin Scarpone. Justin, thanks so much for being part of the craft, and thank you, viewers, for listening to or watching the Craft Podcast. For more links and information about this episode, or to listen to more episodes, you can search for the Craft Podcast by Daniel Tedesco and Michael Du on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcasts. Again, please make sure to like and subscribe, leave a review right now, and we'll see you next time. Until then, keep crafting.